Professor Marimón is an assistant teaching professor in the College of Education. He has developed multiple community-embedded programs related to social justice, human rights, law, and education during his tenure at Penn State. He is the director of the Restorative Justice Initiative and the DC Social Justice Teaching Fellowship, as well as the founder of the Street Law program at Penn State Law. Beyond Penn State, Professor Marimón conducts training on law-related education for international groups.
I'm setting up my own time here and my cheat sheet. All right, well, thank you. So we're here to talk about the state of us. More importantly, of Penn State. And we're talking about the state of us in Penn State. Let me get my clicker. One of our big pieces, core components of our mission is education. But more importantly, access to higher education for all. So, since we're all in higher education, I want us to take a few seconds. I'm going to read a few statements. And as I read those statements, I want you to think about which ones resonate with you. And then I may have you raise your hand just so I get a good feel of which one stood out. All right? So I will have to turn around. All right. So education is the key to unlocking other human rights. Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. And education is a human right with the power to transform. So I want you to pick one, hold on to it. Well, actually, let's get a quick feel. Show of hands. Number one, the first one I read. Which one resonates with you, number one? All right. So the teacher, right? Number two. All right. Number three. They're all good, yes. And number four. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm going to push us to think about today is the value of education, more specifically the value of higher education. And the role it's played not just for ourselves, but in society. Certainly it's a core component of our mission, right? If you look at Penn State's strategic plan, one of our big pieces of our strategic plan is to create transformation in education. Right? And if you look further, it says transforming education requires Penn State to use its size, scope, reach, intellectual capital, and resources to make education accessible to all sectors of society. So what does that mean? What does transforming education mean? What does all sectors of society mean? Who do we think of, and who do we tend to forget? I'm actually here to ask some pretty challenging questions. Partially because I'm a professor and I ask a lot of questions, so that's just my default mode. But I'm going to bring up topics that we typically don't talk about. And I'm going to bring up questions about redemption. Questions about the role in education and rehabilitation. And the role in justice. We're going to revisit some of those quotes towards the end, so just hold on to them. But I want to give you some quick context about my role. Right? So I'm part of the Restorative Justice Initiative, an initiative that's existed for the last 5 years at Penn State. And just to give you a little bit of background on what we do, right? We are a collaborative, so it's not just me, a collaborative of faculty members, staff, graduate students, undergraduate students, committed to seeing education as a tool to restore and empower individuals who are incarcerated. So it is a large movement in terms of who's involved. It is cross-collaborative and stretches across the university. We have about 100 people participating in our programs inside the facility right now. We have multiple programs from counselor education to creative writing, just a ton of programs that are designed to really meet the needs of the individuals in the facility and connect faculty, students, and the students on the inside. So we have about 30 graduate and faculty volunteers participating and 15 roughly consistently undergraduate students. It is a partnership between the College of Education, certainly, with the Rock Ethics Institute, Centerpiece, Department of Corrections, and who did I forget? Center County Correctional Facility, did not forget that. So a little bit about what's our center, what's our core, right? What's motivating us, right? So part of it is certainly education and the power of education, destigmatizing the individuals in the facility, connecting the individuals in the facility with the rest of the community, which is often ignored, and providing experiential opportunities for the people both here and in other campuses. So the easy way to see is think about what we do is we do academic and rehabilitation support, right? So we work in the facility around programs in counselor education, we provide tutoring support, but we also teach classes right now that aren't for credit. And then we provide some awareness events. The key piece of what I'm saying is it's not for credit. Part of the big push of what we're trying to do now is provide college course credits for the students who are essentially taking many of the same classes that you're taking here, but not for credit because they are currently incarcerated. Now here are the real big questions. Why? I think that's, why are we doing this? What's your framework? So when we talk about restoration, we typically talk about it in terms of the individual, right? Healing between the individuals. We don't talk about it in terms of society, right? What is our role in society to heal from the vestiges of injustice, right? And that's guided by history, facts, social conventions, norms, really understanding that healing has to happen from all of us. In fact, prisons actually are a manifestation of us. It's a reflection of us, right? How we handle social issues, how we treat other human beings, about how we feel with redemption, right? It reflects us. And then I want to address one very important component. Mindsets around education and corrections. So mindsets around education and corrections, a few things come to mind, and I think it's important to mention is, one, I'm not a hero, I am not a savior, I am not doing remarkable work. I'm doing what I think is part of our social responsibility, right, to the human beings that are at times just a few miles away from us. Some mindsets that I typically see around education is that education can be a tool to address criminality. I want to move away from that. I want you to think of education as being a tool that supports liberation and supports writing social, political, and economic outcomes that have led to mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex. So many of you maybe have heard about the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, and I know I don't have much time, and I'm taking my time, so I'm going to have to speed through some of this. But I encourage you, as we go through this, to please look into the impact of mass incarceration in the United States, because it does inform the work we're doing, and it impacts all of us, all communities, here and all over the United States and the world. So some quick facts about mass incarceration. So mass incarceration speaks to the proliferation of prisons in the United States, especially for the last 40 to 50 years, post the Civil Rights era. Now, I want to be clear here what I mean about mass incarceration. For my mathematicians, I'm not talking about per capita. I'm not talking about first world nations, developed nations. I mean the United States incarcerates more people than anyone else in the world, period. Right? Hang on to that. More than China that has 1 million people. In fact, if you look at the United States, if we combine the developed, quote-unquote, developed worlds, we incarcerate more than all of them combined. So we have to start asking questions about why. In fact, we have 5% of the world's population, but we hold 25% of the world's people who are incarcerated. It certainly is alarming. And if you start looking, typically we think we're talking about only men, but it affects everyone. The levels of incarcerations have been on the rise for women as well. And if we look at the impact along racial demographics, the rate of incarceration is certainly much higher for Black men and Latino men. Same so for women, so we have the racial component. We look at the demographics in the prison population. More than 60% of our prison population in the United States are made up of people of color. But it doesn't stop there. We've criminalized poverty, right? If we look at what else makes the demographics of the people in prisons, it's also people who have low incomes. So if we're looking at a reflection of us and what we've done in our history, 2.5 million people. 2.5 million people currently incarcerated. So what's our role? This begs those important questions about what's our role, what's our responsibility. After I've thrown all these and very quickly these facts about our obligations, what is our collective norm around what we need to do? Well, we talk about Penn State's and Penn State's reach and opportunity to have an impact. Well, what better way to use our far reach to think about how we can affect people who are housed just 10 minutes from us? In fact, you look at correlation between education and recidivism, returning back to prison. 5% of people with degrees, only 5% of the people who have degrees return. So there's a direct correlation between education and recidivism. And if you look at the cost of education versus incarceration, we're spending $3.8 million on correctional facilities, incarceration. Well, we could be spending $1 million of those dollars and shifting those dollars back to education. But I want to caution us when we only look at this in the context of recidivism and education, because one thing I want to share is when I said redemption and who is worthy of redemption, whether they are re-entering or not as human beings, what is our responsibility in how we treat human beings? So I asked you earlier to look at the strategic plan. And we talked about transforming education to all sectors of society. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen this map. Penn State has 26 Commonwealth campuses. That includes our World Campus. And if you look at the map, next to all the Nittany lines, you see all the correctional facilities and the close proximity that we are to the correctional facilities. Think about our duty and our obligation to effectuate change and transform education and the power and impact that we could have as Penn State. And that is what's informing our mission to move forward. I mean, it's unconscionable when we think about this, right? That there are thousands of students at Penn State right now that have no idea about the lived experiences of people incarcerated, the conditions of the people incarcerated, and the potential of the people who are incarcerated when they're 10 miles from us. And not just University Park, across the entire Commonwealth. But I shared earlier that I am not the best person to share this story. I think the best people to share this story are the people who are incarcerated. Unfortunately, because of the condition of incarceration, they're not here to share those stories about the impact and the influence currently at Penn State. So what I've done is have people around here to share a little bit of those stories with us. And they're not very long stories, I promise. But they're going to share things that students have written about their experiences. And then I may pause for a second.
They're all here.
Okay, so whoever wants to go first.
It allows us the chance to momentarily escape the chaos of our lives and our circumstances, especially this time of year. We are full of emotions, being away from loved ones. It allows us the chance to express ourselves in a positive way.
I'm going to skip a few because I'm watching the time. Can I get one person to read this one?
I really enjoyed the character and charisma of the instructors and the willingness to teach. They would come when they were coming to class. I'd wake up and not want to get up out of bed and remember who was teaching and would change my attitude altogether. The fact there was also something interesting being spoken about or learned. Awesome.
So I also give SRTEs to the students in the facility to evaluate their instructors like we do here. And this was a response to an SRTE from a student. Actually, if I could have Divine read this one.
The fact that Brandon looked at us inmates as human beings. When I came into the class for that 2 hours, every Wednesday afternoon, I felt normal. I felt like a human being, not some caged animal with no rights whatsoever. For the first time in 2 years, I had an opinion. I thank Brandon for that. He was an awesome instructor.
I want you to think about that. Think about your SRTEs. Think about where the line is set. Someone is thanking us for treating them like a human being. That's a reflection of us. That's a reflection of society. So the question starts to beg, what is Penn State going to do? What is our role and responsibility? And then the last one is the poem. This is a student, two different students. One is a poem and one is an art piece created by one in our art program.
The struggle. Owner. Powerful. Strong. Directing. Prevailing. Intimidating. Teacher. Prison. Experience. Courage. Learning. Growing. Building. Scary. Subjective. Me.
So, as I close, I want to go back to these statements. And regardless of where you fell, I want you to think about how this statement resonated with this presentation. How does this speak to your core value, the statement that you started at the beginning? And then I challenge us to combine these values, to unite, to create our Penn State value. And Penn State take our most important function to unlock the powerful weapon to change the world and others with fundamental human rights to transform education. Thank you.